Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Bottom Rung. With me, Kendar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. And we are doing today chapter 60. Stowe's laughter turned maniacal. You are doing this on purpose, Tibs said through clenched teeth. Kina glanced at him as she made notes on the map. Me? Stowe snickered. It's just a few rats. More snickering. Not even upgraded from upstairs. You know how much I hate them. How would I? Stowe stated, sounding innocent, but stopped as Tibs glared at the ceiling. You can see and hear everything in here. You know how I feel about those things. Stowe was quiet, then offered, I'm just trying to help you get over your fear of rats. He snickered again. I'm not afraid, Tibs snapped. I hate them, and that's your fault. I? Tibs? Jekyll said, cutting off stuff. We good? Tibs nodded and squared his shoulder. He'd showed a dungeon he wasn't afraid of any rats. Dealing with the rats. The fighter looked at the room, then Tibs. That's a lot of them. Are you sure? He raised a hand at the glare Tibs gave him. Okay, we're dealing with the rats. Miss, Karina, can each of you deal with one of can each of you keep one of them busy? I can destroy one right now, Mez stated. Will that leave you anything to work with after that? The archer hesitated, then shook his head. Then I'd rather you just keep it busy so you have enough essence for the next room. We got lucky last time. He turned to the cleric, who slowly spun his staff before him, darkness trailing at each end. I will be more useful this time. This staff is attuned to my element. He looked at Tibs. It was a fortunate find. Stowe snorted. I am so glad Genny is busy elsewhere. I'd never heard the end of it. Tibs didn't ask what that was about. He was angry at the dungeon. Jekyll nodded. All right, Maz, Karina, start us off. Tibs ran into the room in time with the first explosion. Flame covered his knife as he sliced the closest rat. It cost him essence, but the shriek of pain that came from it before it dissolved was satisfying. He stabbed the next one, cut a third, then a fourth. Tibs, down! Mez called. He dropped. There was an explosion not far. Then he was up, skewering the rat, who thought that meant Tibs was too distracted to notice it was climbing his leg. He flung it aside, threw the knife at the one heading for Comdar, and turned, pulling his air knife without watching if it hit. He cut two rats with one swing. One landed on his back, big by the weight, and with a scream, he reached back, grabbed it, slammed it on the ground over and over until another rat was on him and he had to deal with that. Tibs panted, looking around for that snarling rat, only to realize he was the one snarling. There were no rats left, only copper coins littered the floor. The golems were rubble, and Karina pulled an amulet from that. This is new, she said, examining it. First time we get something other than coins from one of them. The others didn't drop anything, Jekyll replied, disappointed, as he pushed rubble aside. Tibs, Comdar offered his knife back. Are you well? He nodded, taking it. Where were the rats? There had to be more. There always were more. Memories of being swarmed by them made him shudder. Maybe I went too far, Tibs commented, and Tibs snarled. Tibs? Comdar asked. I'm fine, he snapped. I want you to breathe, Tibs. He realized his lungs hurt. He took a shuddering breath, and as he let it out, he continued shaking. There had been so many rats, but he killed them. I'm okay, he said, and even to him, he sounded better. The cleric smiled. 24 coppers, Karina said, offering them to him. They went in his pouch. He didn't bother making sure they were all there. What was 1 or 2 copper less, after all? And 1 amulet. If there's another one in the Rattling village, that'll be enough. That'll be 2 for this run. There might not be, Tibs said, adding it to his pouch. The chest have random stuff in them? Pause. Gaming was busy elsewhere. Maybe he still wouldn't be as strict with the rules? But I think that if we want anything at this point, it should be a bow for Maz. I already have an amulet. Armor's always nice, Jekyll said. Tibs, what's with only one of the golem giving us loot? You're going to use me to try to get more out of the dungeon, aren't you? He glared at the innocent look the fighter gave him. Telling that the Whippers are one unit and Stowe stopped. Right, this is Jekyll. Tell him the amulet is worth much more than the silver each normally drops. Tibs groaned. I'm going to be stuck between you two. He rubbed his temple. Jekyll's not going to be happy until he gets more, and you're not going to give it to him because of the rules. I really wish you could just argue with him directly. I'm not talking with it, Jekyll said, and Tibs looked at him in disbelief. I don't want to piss it off. But you as a buffer, my skill with dealing with other people is much better. Says the man who seems to get everyone to talk to him, Rena said. That's because of the power of ale. Jekyll replied. Enough of it, and I become a very likable fellow. Can I get the dungeon drunk, Tibs? There are days I wish I could. Still replied. Tibs shook his head. Okay, let's give this a try. Feel free to dumb it down for him, Tibs. He paused. I put the 5 Whippers in this room on the randomized loot assignment list, but they are treated as one creature. The list is set up so that you'll get a bunch of minor items or coins more often, but you can get one item of similar value and also a small chance you'll get something much more valuable than the rest. It's random, he said once he was sure Stowe was done. Sometimes it'll be coins, sometimes small stuff, sometimes bigger stuff. He wasn't mentioning the possibility of something valuable. It would just cause Jekyll to plan ways of fighting them more often. You mentioned there are rules, Kemdar said. Are those set by the dungeon? Stowe snorted. I wish. No. Moving on, Jekyll said. If there isn't going to be more loot here, there are some with the ratlings. The tent encampment was much the same. Tents in small clusters over the campfire at the center. Tibs hadn't appreciated how large the cavern was the previous time. He could only just make out the other side around some tents. The direct path was also gone. I take it we want all the chest, Mez said, and Jekyll stared at the man. Last time Tibs mentioned the chest changed tents. That means we have to kill the ratling. That's why they're there, Jekyll said. Is it? Tibs asked, and the others looked at him. He waited. There was only one person with the answer. It sort of is, Jekyll as Stowe answered. Why else would they be there? So they can live? They aren't alive, Tibs, Stowe replied. They're just creatures. He nodded. It is, he told Jekyll. Kieran looked at the encampment. Being able to talk with the dungeon might make this more complicated. What happens when it makes something and it evolves into its own person? They can do that? Stowe and Mez asked at the same time. Kieran shrugged. If dungeons can evolve into thinking being, why not their creations? I didn't. Oh, I get what she's thinking. You can tell her she's wrong. Tibs didn't. Telling her she was wrong would lead to her asking how that was, and he'd be in the middle of another discussion. How about we deal with the ratlings instead? We can sneak around as long as we can, taking them as we find them. Only you do sneaky, Tibs, Jekyll said. I think I can manage something, Kieran said. Tibs looked at the cleric. I am afraid I am better at rooting secrets than I am at hiding myself. Then the 3 of us head to the center in as a straight line as we can, Jekyll said. We kill those we find and just make noise to attract the rest, while you 2 do the sneaking to find chests so we know, Tibs said while Kieran glared at the fighter. We look for the chest after all the ratlings are dead. Me and Carino will kill those who stay behind to attack at range or are just slow to reach you. I came across a few of them last time. It's not like the chests are going to vanish while we fight. Stowe said. Tibs sighed. That might change next time. We keep giving him ideas. If you want an idea, dungeon, Jekyll said, more rewards for the fight is always a great one. Stowe chuckled. I'll take that under advisement. Don't look so down, Tibs. Everyone gives me idea. You just know when I get one. That doesn't make me feel any better. Jekyll raised his hand, and Tibs looked into the cavern. When no rattlings were visible, the fighter motions them ahead. He, Nez, and Kamdar stepped between the tents in front of them, while Karina motioned to the left, motioned motioned to herself and then her left. Tibbs nodded. He didn't like letting her go alone. She'd remained with the others last time. She knew what she was capable of. Tibbs headed to the right. The first tent was empty, as were the others around this campfire. He planned to clear each small camp along the periphery, then he'd meet up with Kirina and they could go help the others. Any rattling left hiding in the tents could be dealt with afterwards. When the fighting started, he forced himself to continue. They were all up Salon, and they had already survived this cavern. Not knowing what to expect, they had already survived the cavern, even not knowing what to expect. The three of them would be fine. In the fourth camp, he found a ratling in a tent, working around a cauldron. Like other rattlings, it had hide for clothing. It had hide for clothing. But this one had no weapons. I gave weapons in the other one, in the previous one. It also had its back to him. He snuck behind it, and just as he was about to slit his throat, it screeched and bucked, getting only a nick before turning on Tibbs and raking his armor with its claws. He shouldered it away as two other rattlings, identical in all ways he could see, entered. He moved to keep them away, bumping into the cauldron, which tipped over and spilled nothing. He set aside the question of why it had been stirring nothing and focused on getting outside. He needed more space to fight them. Fortunately, any time he had them maneuvered away from the opening, one of them hurried to get back there. Even rushing didn't cause the rattling to flee. They exchanged a few blows. He gave it some cut, and Tibbs had to back away as the other joined in. He reminded himself they weren't alive. He shouldn't expect from them the reaction he would from people. They weren't afraid of getting hurt. They existed to kill him. The fact they'd been left behind indicated Stowe wanted them to deal with rogues. Tib wasn't the first one to go around, making sure no one would surprise his team. How many hadn't survived their encounter? He slashed, and as they moved away, he rushed the exit. This time, Tibbs stabbed a rattling that came at him. It grabbed onto his hand, keeping him from pulling the knife out, and it backed away from the exit. Before he could pull his other knife, another grabbed that hand. Tibbs kicked at it, and it let go, but his knife was no longer in its sheath. The third rattling jumped on his back, claws raking at his chest and neck. Then they caught a joint. It started pulling, trying to peel the armor off him. The rattling came back to grab at his free hand, and Tibbs shouldered it away. He then focused on dislodging the rattling on his back, pulling the claws out of the joint. When it came free, he barely kept it from raking his face. Tibbs screamed in fear and frustration. Then the rattling fell off his back, and the one in the knife in its chest crumbled to rubble, freeing him completely. He turned, looking to stab at the other rattling, but it was a pile of rubble too. He sensed his reserve and knew what had happened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it." "I know," Stowe replied. "I'm not worried about these two. It's the third one that concerns me." He spun, readying himself for an attack, but that rattling was also rubble. "I thought you needed to touch them to drain their essence." The pile was 5 paces away. "I thought so too. I've never done this before." He didn't know what he'd done. He hadn't thought about doing it. He'd been terrified of those claws, then the rattlings were dead. "Go help your friend, Tibbs. I need to talk with Ganny about this, so I won't be watching the rest." Tibbs collected his knives and ran out of the tent. Tibbs only got to kill one more rattling, one that had seemed to sneak around to get behind his friends. Kirina had already reached them, and there was enough rubble. Tibbs wondered how they'd We're going to find the coins among it. What kept you? Jekyll asked, grinning. This was fun. I got jumped. Tibbs replied. Are you okay? Fighter asked, all levity gone. He looked at Tibbs' armor. Are you bleeding? Is that something you can heal? I'm not bleeding, and I don't know. Is everyone okay? I looked them over, sensing the essence coursing through them. Instead of waiting for answers, he looked them over, sensing the essence coursing through them instead of waiting for answers. Mez was the only one with an injury that registered in the essence, and Tibbs went to him. The cuts were superficial. What happened? The archer favored his life. One of the rattling was armed with a club and surprised me. It got in one shot before I could hit it with my bow. He showed him the broken bow. I don't think it's broken, but I can't put much weight on it. Tibbs nodded. Yet the essence didn't have the jagged break that echoed a broken bone. This was more like a bubble formed in the leg and that pushed against the essence. Was that bruising or another kind of injuries he wasn't familiar with? He pushed his essence in the leg and wrapped it like he had the broken bones. Then, as gently as he could, he tightened back into its proper shape. Mez hissed, then, Stop! Tibbs, stop! This is hurting worse. He relaxed his essence, then hardened it in place. Sorry, I don't know how this works. Does this help? Mez put weight on his leg, then nodded. Just feels sore now. As long as I don't have to run, I'll be okay. Thank you. The cleric will take care of the rest when we leave. Tibbs stood. They separated and went over the tents, and as Tib had hoped, one contained a bow. It was made of dark wood and encrusted with gems. It was imbued with fire essence, earth, and others. Mez held it with awe and reverence. Jackal, I have to keep this. I'll repay the team however I can. You can imagine how deep the reserve in this bow is. I'll never have to worry about running out when I'm using it. Jekyll looked at what was left of the other bow. Is there anything that we have to keep from this run? If Mez has to use that bow, we're going to have to pay for it. The encampment's loot consisted of several pieces of armor, 3 of which had essence woven through them. One was made of metal instead of leather. There was a knife sheath like the one Francis had, which fitted a short sword, and a few silver as well as a pile of copper. We should keep the amulet, Rena said for Tibbs. I have an amulet, he replied, studying the way the essence was woven into the sheath. But this lets you store another element's essence, she said. You should see about getting one for each of your elements. Tibbs nodded. All right, Jekyll called. Then, if Maz can make it through the rest of the run without using the bow, we'll see how expensive it is. We could turn around now, the archer said. More loot is waiting, Jekyll replied. If Tib gets to keep an amulet, that's great. Otherwise, we'll wait until the next run. Everyone agreed and loaded the piece of armor as they could into the backpack and had to carry the rest in their arms. Maybe the dungeon should give us special packs, Jekyll said. Like those chests, bigger inside than out. He looked at Tib expectantly. The dungeon's dealing with something. He only hears us when he's paying attention. You didn't see the fight? Jekyll asked, dismayed. He had to go partially through it. But it was such a great fight. They reached the next room and stopped. This can't be good, Karina said. The cavern was similar in size to the one they just left, but it was empty. It was all flat. It was a flat, bare floor and walls. Do you think it's a trap room? Mez asked. That's too big. That's a big room for traps. Tibbs crouched at the edge and looked at it. He didn't think there were traps. It didn't have the right feel for it, but he couldn't explain what that meant. Traps didn't come with sign, and if essence was used here, it wasn't any different from the rest of the floor. So why his certainty? Then he noticed it. He wasn't actively sensing for his essence, the one that coursed through people and dungeon creatures. but it was there under the floor. As he focused on what he felt, a section of the floor lifted and a nose poked out, twitching. Then a hand, fingers curling around the edge to push it out of the way. A head poked out. "Is that a bunny?" Jekyll asked in surprise. It looked like one. Long ears, large eyes, small muzzle. All made of stone, just like everyone creatures in the dungeon. This one was much larger than the bunny on the first floor. "How many do you think are under the floor?" Mez asked. "I guess this is going to be like the ratlings," Jekyll said. I guess you're keeping the bow after all," Mez smiled. "Do we really want to take them on without knowing how many there are?" Karina said, looking at the map. "We can wait until another team's tried it." Tibs stood and unsheathed his knife. "They're bunnies. How tough can they be?" And this concludes chapter 60 of Bottom Rung. If you are enjoying this, please subscribe, hit the bell, share with your friends, hit the thumbs up. If you want to read the rest of the story, as well as get started on book 2, it's on Royal Road. You can get there from the link in the notes, and there's also a link to my Patreon should you want to support me. And with that, I wish you a good day.